welcome back to our podcast, A Day in the Life of a Digital Anthropologist. Today we have another exciting guest, Ipshita. So I'm really happy to have you. I know we talk a little bit about what you do, who you are, but can you give us a little introduction of your background and where you're currently working?
Sure. And yeah, I'm glad to be here speaking with you. I'm Ipshita. I am a business anthropologist or an economic anthropologist, but over the past few years, I've primarily worked in the digital space. Initially, it started off with my doctoral dissertation, where I did my research with digital tech startups and their founders and their users and consumers. So a lot of it, I realized, even though it was conventional ethnography in the sense I was located at the sites where they were working, but so much of their work is digital. And so I realized that's something I need to spend more time with and engage in methodologically, and as also just thinking through what that means for anthropology. And currently as well, my more recent work has been that domain, and I know we can talk about it more as we go along. Currently, I am a learning and strategy consultant. I work with multiple organizations and support them in strategic planning, in designing programs, managing programs, learning and evaluation. And again, a lot of the skills that I've developed as a digital anthropologist have been helpful there.
That is super interesting. Like totally, I'm interested in trying to figure out how do you got into the field, and then how do you work on your daily life, with the different clients and depending what kind of companies you're working on. So walk me through your typical day, like from the time you wake up. What does your morning routine looks like as a digital anthropologist?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every day depends and varies a little bit. So I would say I usually start the mornings with some writing. Typically, whatever writing projects I'm doing, I like to devote a bit of time to that in the morning, especially if I'm working on a proposal or a grant or something of that nature. I think it's nice to be able to have a dedicated set of time working on that. I also have, I think, some time set out for informational meetings and networking meetings with fellow anthropologists who are practicing in the practicing space, which is, a growing community and one that it's really nice to be a part of and just learn how to support one another's work. So I normally try and also keep some space out for that. If there's something where I'm doing active research, I would say the morning time is also dedicated to potentially research work that could be conducting interviews, data analysis, writing, all of that. So I would say each day varies a little bit, but I try to demarcate it in the sense have more of the research and writing work done in the morning and then leave the rest of the day for meetings and so on.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. It's similar to kind of what my morning routine does. Like, so you're freelance independent, right?
At the moment, yes. So I am also teaching a couple of courses in the university here, but I am also primarily working independently at the moment with a few organizations, mostly mission-driven startup companies, as well as nonprofit and international development companies.
Okay. So when you're freelance independent, do you think you have more freedom to adjust your routine, contrary to someone when you're like working a regular 9 to 5 or working on a specific project? You have to have like a specific routine that is like I have to wake up at 7 or 6 a.m. because by 9 I have to be doing, my administrative work, writing grants. Then have to do my knowledge moment where I have to like be reading constant like news or paper so I can be upgraded. Do you find yourself that your routine is more do you have more freedom on it, or it's a little different? You have like you're very like disciplined and structured every time?
I don't think I'm that disciplined. I do think there's a certain level of flexibility and autonomy in this kind of a schedule. And as I said, each day can look quite different based on what clients you're working with, whether you're having a bunch of meetings that day or no meetings, you're mostly writing and reading and so on. So yes, I do have that autonomy, which I'm very grateful for. I will say in defense of the 9 to 5 structure, I've done that as well. And I do think there are some benefits to having that structure. I think it comes with a certain level of separation of work and life. I do think, ironically, in some ways, if you have a 9 to 5 job, at least where you have a good, maybe manager or supervisor, or you're working at a company with good boundaries, then the moment you clock out, you're kind of free and you go off. But having this more kind of amorphous schedule where it's autonomous, but work can really spill into your every day in various ways. So I do see the benefits of both, but yes, at the moment I am in the space where it's a little more flexible and autonomous, I would say.
Right. Yes, definitely. I feel that I'm on the same path right now. So how do you keep your skills sharp and stay up to date with the latest developments in digital anthropology? Is there any specific practices or training you engage in a daily basis? Like, like we commented before, reading what's new paper. You mentioned that you do a lot of networking. What else do you do to stay up to?
Yeah, so there's some journals like the Economic Anthropology Journal, the Journal of Business Anthropology. Those have some very interesting research that is published in terms of digital anthropology. So I definitely try to keep a lookout for articles that are original research that is published in forums like that. But beyond that, I think you also sometimes find interesting workshops, even on LinkedIn, you find workshops, and through LinkedIn Learning, you have different types of courses. Another good one is the Project Management Institute. I think they have some really good courses for upskilling, for understanding how you can work in this space or the kind of skills you need. So yeah, I think I don't know if I consciously have a plan to acquire more skills or to keep abreast of everything that's happening in this field, but just being plugged into some of those sources, I think is helpful.
Yeah, you cover a great topic. LinkedIn has a plethora of events that can help you, navigate through this field if you're interested, and especially if you specialize in a specific field, like I do in AI. There's like an overwhelming amount, so you will literally be like plugging into an event from 9 to 9. So yeah. So what kind of projects are you currently working on, and could you walk us through a typical project from start to finish?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can give you maybe a couple of examples. So one of the more academic kind of projects I'm currently working on is exploring digital solutions for the air pollution crisis in India, in New Delhi specifically. This is a research project that came out of my own ethnographic work that I did during my dissertation over there, and has sort of spiraled into something a little bit different but similar. I'm looking at how the digital space has become a site for activism for middle-class citizens who are trying to basically think of or imagine a space in a city in terms of their work, in terms of their everyday life, where they are not as impacted by air pollution. And at the same time, there's another type of activism that's happening, which is more commercial and more connected to entrepreneurial interventions and technological fixes, which is a whole range of companies who are creating these types of solutions like air filtration systems and purification systems and nasal filters and all of that. So it's interesting to see the interaction between those two types of interventions, both happening in the digital space to try to resolve this air pollution crisis. And I think one of my current projects is trying to unpack that and understand that a little bit. And I'm trying to finalize writing a paper for that particular project. So that's one of the projects which I think engages quite directly with the digital sphere.
Wow, that's super interesting. We'll definitely be looking the lookout when you finish that paper. We're definitely gonna be, sharing with their network so they can read it. And
Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
yes, how do you approach your research, and can you share any unique methodologies or tools that you use?
Um, so yeah, I think I really started out grounded in the traditional ethnographic methods that we are all trained in as anthropologists. And as I said, it was really when I went to the field, I realized so much of what my consultants and interlocutors or research participants were doing was in the digital sphere. And, I finished my fieldwork in 2019, and then in 2020, we had the pandemic. So I do think that led to this a moment of reckoning for anthropology in terms of the fieldwork question and how one can do that. And I'm sure there's some very cool digital research projects that came out of the necessity of that period. In terms of methods, I think being a part of online and digital communities is one of the big things that I found to be really useful. And these can be through social media, but also, forums like that, but that are more communication driven, like WhatsApp. In terms of my field site in India, that's a really active one. Methodologically, something I've found to be important there is the question of ethics and consent, because it's not as clear cut as when you're approaching somebody and having a more traditional interaction as you would, in traditional ethnography. And so definitely trying to think what informed consent looks like digitally, especially when people are sharing things, on online forums and communities, which are quite rich in the way that they really contain information that's really insightful. How do you protect confidentiality, anonymity, gain the trust of the people who run the group, make it transparent what you're trying to do. So I do think that a lot of this is still things we are trying to come up with in terms of best practices. But I do think my overall methodology is still very much rooted in traditional ethnographic methods.
Interesting. Yeah. And that kind of like links to our next question, which is digital anthropology covers a broader range of topics. How do you balance your focus between areas like online communities, social media, virtual realities, and AI?
Yeah, I've sort of just been led by what my participants have been doing. And so the first few projects was definitely more of online communities and social media, because that's where I found them. That's where a lot of them spent a lot of time. In subsequent projects, like the recent one on air pollution that I told you about, I have dabbled a little bit more into understanding the actual product in terms of, the user experience of the product, in terms of the technological aspects. A lot of these are often AI products too. And so I think I would say that it's not like I have tried to consciously balance it, but more like these are the different directions where at different points for different projects that I have been pulled into. And so in that sense, I feel like the world of digital anthropology has opened itself to me rather than, me as an anthropologist going and trying to explore it consciously. But yeah, I would say that it really depends on the project you're doing.
That's true. That's completely true. I agree with that. What are the biggest challenges you face in your work, and how do you overcome them?
That's a really great question. Well, maybe I will mention a few that come to mind. So I would say, for instance, being a freelancer at this point or a consultant working with various organizations, translating the value of what I do to a cross-functional team that has various members many of whom don't understand or know much about anthropology, but trying to understand and showcase the value of that data and that research insights and how that will be helpful in shaping the organization, the program, the project, whatever it is. I think that's definitely a challenge, but also super important to do. I think methodologically, what I touched on very briefly in terms of this still being a space that's developing and growing, and we are trying to find best practices around ethics and around consent and so on. I think that's another challenge. So I do look to the work of others working in this space to see, the paths they have followed, the best practices they have laid down. And that's been really interesting.
Yeah, I think this field is an ever evolving, like new emerging field, but at the same time, it's been here for almost like 20, 30 years. Not everybody's familiar with our type of work that we do. What are some of the biggest rewarding, what is the most rewarding about your role as a digital anthropologist?
I think highlighting a lot of challenges that people face in the digital sphere, which they don't really have a language to necessarily articulate. So for example, I worked on a project. This was connected to entrepreneurs that we have been working with for a long time, but specifically challenges around, gender-based violence in the digital sphere that women entrepreneurs face, women in the public domain face, and which hampers their work and hinders their ability to go and make a living, especially if they're in the public space. And I did this project where I was able to conduct research across 5 different sites and understand similar challenges, but also differences, and articulate how women in all these spaces understand what digital violence is, gender-based violence is, and how that impacts them. And there were a lot of similarities and shared experiences, but some key differences too. So I do think something like that is very rewarding when you're able to highlight a problem that exists and people know it exists, but they are unable to necessarily understand what lens to approach it with. Because a lot of people have worked on this topic through the general framework of gender-based violence. And that is true, that's what's happening, but there's definitely a technological dimension here at play. So that approach that you can bring as a digital anthropologist combines those 2 lenses, the social and cultural, as well as the technological. And I think that's really helpful.
Wow, you're doing an excellent job. I love it. Wow. What is the best advice you have received that has helped you in your career? And what advice will you give someone interested in the digital anthropology?
I have received so much good advice and so many good conversations along the way. Let me think about something that stands out. I think I would say that understanding the value that you are trying to get from your work, from your work life, it's really important. And also the realization that it can shift. Of course, it's important for us economically to make a living, but there could be other values you're getting out of it in terms of sustenance and purpose and finding something meaningful to do. But you do not necessarily have to find all of those in every project, and that's not possible. And understanding that some projects may be less fulfilling than others, and that's perfectly fine. So to me, I think that was really good advice when I first heard it, because I think I at least had a tendency to try and find the perfect job. And I realized that it's not necessarily one job that's going to bring all the things to the table, but you have to find something valuable in the work you do overall. In terms of advice that I would give a digital anthropologist, I think I would say, this is very practical stuff, but to keep a lookout at the conferences, the AAA conference, the SFAA conference, the EPIC conference, and all of these have really cool panels these days and conversations and roundtables on digital questions of doing digital ethnography, digital anthropology, and definitely to try and maybe even if you're not able to attend every conference, that's completely understandable. But try not to see who are the people who are speaking and follow their work and connect with them. I think, most people in this space are really friendly and open to talking with others. And I think that's a good way to know also, coming back to that previous question you asked about how do you keep up with the trends in the field. And I think this is a good way to do that as well.
That is an excellent advice, and I stand by that too. I that's what I do, and I think that's what it gets me, got me through where I am, by just networking and being open to having these conversations. And we are having this awesome podcast that we get to meet such amazing people who doing great, amazing things in this field. Okay, so our next question is, how do you maintain a work-life balance in the field that is so deeply connected in the digital world?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think that's where, the benefits of the 9 to 5 job comes into play. I think you have to be conscious about it. And I also understand that work-life balance can mean different things. I was having some conversations around this recently. And yeah, I think there's a certain type of balance that having, the ability to clock out at 5 o'clock and forget about your work until the next morning is a certain type of balance. But another type of balance is flexibility, the ability to take an afternoon off and go do something you need to do, and then just, work a little bit later that night instead. And, just those kinds, work out of a coffee shop sometime, things like that, which may seem small in the grand scheme of things. But I think people can find those opportunities for finding meaning and balance in the role they currently are at. But yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for that, except to say it's really something that we have to take as important and center in our own work.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you basically, our entire world's in digital. Even though you're not working, you still have to have your phone and you're connected. Either you go to Pinterest or whatever your personal interest that you do, you logging into your bank account, you still connected somehow to a technology device. And what is the next one is, do you work more independently or do you often collaborate with other researchers, institutions, or communities?
I've done a bit of both, primarily independent, I would say, and I've enjoyed both. I think if you're in a team and it's a team, that has, again, it can have folks from different disciplines and perspectives. I've certainly enjoyed that as well. I also am fairly good at working on my own, in the sense of setting deadlines. It's something a quality, I think, you kind of acquire as you go along. I don't know if I always had those skills. I think I've just acquired them along the way. And keeping yourself accountable to deadlines is important. But I also enjoy working in teams as well. And I hope I get the opportunity to do that more.
Yeah. So when you're doing like working for a specific project, independently with a company, do you tend to hire more digital anthropologists or specific people in the field that you're looking for, or you just do the work on yourself?
Well, yeah, it depends. I think mostly the teams I've been a part of, I have mostly been the only anthropologist on the team, and often the others in the team are, you could say they could be subject matter experts of certain types. They could be organizational development folks. They could be, the different types of backgrounds, really. And so I have often been the only anthropologist. So I'm yet to actually work in a team with more than one digital anthropologist, but that will be interesting, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah, if it's a big project, they're probably gonna have to hire, helper. Yeah. How long, how the projects that you work on, can you give us an example? What is the time length, like from start to end? Like the shortest one and the longest one that you have worked?
The shortest one was, I would say, about 2 months. The longest one is been 4 years.
Wow.
So I mean, it's still ongoing. It's a kind of a project cycle for an international development program that runs various, it's annually run with different groups of people every year, and they have a 4-year budget to do it.
Okay. Yep. So it's, if whoever's interested in this field, just so you know that this is what you're expecting. You can have a short project or working on something that is very long term, which is great in terms of finances. And then it comes to the next question, that one of the reasons why I put this question is because I can't, like when I was trying to do, become a anthropologist, sometimes you refer online to see what is the kind of number that you can get, or like, the salary, in terms of salary, what can you expect in this field? And there is nothing out there that can help you, market yourself, say, hey, listen, this is a statistic that says that digital anthropologists should be earning 90,000 a year with an undergrad degree, right? So the question is, what can someone expect in terms of compensation when they study out in digital anthropology, and how does it change with experience?
I wish I had more information to answer this question. And the reason that I completely agree with you. I think this has always been a big question mark for me as well. For me, some of the initial projects that I started working on were with nonprofit organizations who have a fixed budget for particular roles. And so I wouldn't say that the amount was staggeringly high, but it was fairly okay because these were well-established nonprofits. I mean, I would say that it depends on what kind of firm, what kind of organization you end up at. But I think I would do a little bit of research, and I think this is a really good question to ask in informational interviews for someone who's starting out, especially if you're trying to go into a particular sector. I'm sure salaries in tech is different from international development, is different from higher education. I'm sure they're all, there could be some parallels, but they could be different as well. Yeah, I don't know if I have a concrete answer to that, except to say it really depends on the sector.
Okay. Next question has to do with the ethical considerations. I know you cover a little bit, but the question goes like this. How do you navigate the ethical challenge that arise in digital anthropology, especially when dealing with sensitive online communities or data?
Yeah, this is something that I would say is one of those things that talking to fellow anthropologists and ethnographers who work with these kinds of communities and with this type of data, it's great to have those conversations and know what kind of best practices they follow. Just a few things I have, seen recommended, and some of these I have done myself in the past. So if you're a member, if you're joining like a Facebook group or a social media group where you're intending to do research, I would reach out to the group moderators with a informed consent form that is classic, in the way, the template that we follow generally with other types of interlocutors. And I would explain my project, explain when and what type of data I would gather. I think it's also important to distinguish in those communities between just things you come across, comments that people have written and stray comments that people say, and differentiate between that and a proper interview that you do with somebody. And I think it's important because sometimes so when you're doing an interview with somebody, you are normally following the ethics of confidentiality and anonymity and all of that we, tend to follow. But it's, I think, important to remember that some of those stray comments and things that we definitely influences us. And even if we are not taking down any kind of data that we should not, just being very careful about the ethics of using that, or just being very sure that we are doing following the appropriate method, especially with that type of data, I think is important in online communities.
But do you think it would, like, if you obviously um, let the moderators know that you're gonna be kind of doing the study of that specific group, and if they notify the users, do you think that will change that behavior? Could people tend to change that behavior when when you're being observed and someone is taking notes? The behavior completely changed that compared to when you are in a space when you are free with anonymity and nobody knows who you are or what they're gonna do with this information. Do you think that's another way to also do research, or what it's like unethical wrong?
I think if you are going to, use that community as a pretty big source of information, and I think I heard your question, your voice was breaking up a little, but from what I understand, you're saying that people's behaviors can change if they know that, you're an anthropologist out there observing them. I do think that is just a part of what's, just something that one has to accept to a large extent. I think one has to be ethical and make sure you take the proper consent and be transparent in terms of what your intentions are. Now, I don't think, for instance, if you attend an online seminar or webinar or something like that, and there are some interactions there that play out, I think it's just a one-off thing. You're not really, you were attending it and then you happen to encounter and see something or hear something that was interesting. I think in a place like that, you might come to see some more free behavior where, people don't know you're an anthropologist or anything like that. And then I do think you can use that data as long as you're, again, maintaining anonymity and confidentiality and being really careful about it. But I would still maybe ask the organizer of the webinar and mention that, you're an anthropologist and so on. But I think overall people's behavior might change, but it's something that you as an anthropologist can unpack and explore further through interviews and so.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, correct. For the future of the field, where do you see the field of digital anthropology heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's going to grow bigger because so much of our work and our lives are increasingly digital in their orientation. We spend so much time in the digital space. So many of our interactions are now, which used to be non-digital, are digital now. So I think this is going to just increase more and more. And really, I think different fields of anthropology will probably have a digital dimension to them. So one that, for instance, I can think about is medical anthropology, because when I started my fieldwork, I was working with digital health tech startup founders. And so a lot of the initial work I did was with digital products, AI products, and machine learning, wearable technologies, and so on. Which are, again, something where you can use both the medical anthropology lens and a digital anthropology lens. So I do think it's going to grow bigger as we go ahead.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I feel like this field is gonna grow so rapidly, especially with technology. And the last question is the daily reflection. At the end of the day, how do you wind down and what do you reflect on after a day of working as a digital anthropologist?
Yeah, I think, having a sense of what you achieved that day and how that's going to connect to what you're going to do tomorrow is important. I think usually, especially if you're, a freelancer or a consultant, often you have multiple things going on. You're wearing several hats. And so it's easy to forget one thing and just do the other thing for extended periods of time. So I think having that reflection period to make sure you're paying attention to different aspects of what you need to do. It could be advertising and branding, it could be content creation, it could be writing and research and networking. So many aspects. And I think that's what makes the job fun, but it's also something that again, maybe you need to take a few moments to think about where you're at with all these different things and make sure you are paying relatively equal attention to all of them.
Yeah, that's a great way to see it as independent. Yeah, I totally agree. As an independent and freelance, also running a nonprofit, yeah, you tend to sometimes forget about yourself and just running a bunch of things. I'm gonna add an extra question because I usually don't have independent freelancers, but how do you find your clients for people who was like interested in transitioning into freelance, being independent, or who want to become a digital anthropologist and still college? Like, what are your main ways that you find clients?
Yeah, I think there are several things people do. I know people who are part of communities, they could be on LinkedIn or so on, where they have a lot of recurring clients. A lot of people answer RFPs to find clients. I also know that a lot of people who are fairly well established and more senior rely primarily on word of mouth to find clients. So I would say I have dabbled in all of these a little bit. And the ones that I have found to be most effective are developing connections with established consultants in the field. And they often are looking to, because I feel quite new and relatively, early stage. And I think they are often looking to bring new people on into projects. And so again, keeping up those connections, requesting, people to connect you with others who might also be consultants, having their own firms, or hiring contractors, or even hiring, part-time folk and so on. I think those are some things you can try, and it's a good idea, I think, to try a bunch of these and see what works for you.
Great, yeah. And many of these consultants, do they ask you for proposals? And like you have to write a grant and give like a estimate of what your services will cost and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So most of them do. I've also had a few who really didn't, who sort of just wanted to hear about, the work I've done and so on. And they did ask me what's the price I would be charging, or sometimes that is, you don't have a lot of leeway there. It could be, again, depending on the project budget a little bit. But yeah, mostly you should be ready to have some kind of a proposal when you're approaching these conversations, and having at least a rough idea of how you would approach this work, as well as how much you'd like to charge for it.
Right. Yeah. Do that. So if you're watching this podcast and you want to transition, or you want to study and be like, be independent, grant writing, writing proposals is such a important skill in this field. So your undergrad, make sure instead of taking just random electives, you take a lot of courses in grant writing. That's one of my suggestions. Yeah. So, okay. So thank you so much for taking the time of telling us your wonderful story. It was such an insightful, and I love it. I feel like now I get to know you a little bit more better, and I love like walking through people's shoes for a day. It's so interesting because as anthropologists, we are so used to observe people, but this time around we're like observing you, the anthropologists, trying to understand who you are. So we're doing a sort of like virtual ethnographic work on you, if we can call it that. But yeah. So
yeah, well, thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, you want to leave your email, your social media profile, anything that you want to share?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is probably LinkedIn. So yeah, you can find me, Ipshita Gosh, on LinkedIn, and I'm connected with you, Scarlett. So that's one way to find me.
Yeah, definitely. I will be dropping the link on your podcast. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, we'll definitely have, the right access to you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time, and have an awesome day.
Thank you.